Well, Kash Patel and Dan Bongino are finally going to give us answers that we've all been waiting for, folks. They're finally going to tell us all the hard truths. We'll also be going through the government's long history of running drugs all around the world and discuss Glenn Greenwald's leaked sex tape and who on earth might possibly want to blackmail and silence journalists. Welcome back to Candace. Well, Dan Bongino and Kash Patel are finally getting around to investigating the heavy questions that we all want answers to. The American people spoke, and they listened to absolutely no one. Because while the Epstein files are still rotting on Pam Bondi's desk, they've reopened the investigation. But not into who Epstein was working for, not into whether or not his trafficking network is still operational, not who he had blackmail on or what the acts of treason they may have committed on behalf of him or his employer were. No. They've reopened the investigation into the bag of cocaine that was found in the Joe Biden White House on July 2nd, 2023. Jesse Waters of Fox Primetime FOIA'd documents pertaining to the cocaine case, and the details are not adding up. When the story broke back in 2023, we received this photo of the cocaine where it was allegedly found in a random storage cubby that just so happens to be in a camera blind spot where there's no surveillance footage of who might have left it there. How convenient. It's especially convenient because the day the story first broke, the cocaine was first found in the library. And then MSNBC reported that it was found near the Situation Room, but then it was finally revealed that they'd actually found it inside this random storage cubby where it was photographed and documented. But the documents that Jesse Waters obtained, strangely, had the location where it was found redacted. So just to be clear, they told us where they found it, inside the cubby. They photographed where they found it, inside the cubby. But then they redacted it from the FOIA documents because where it was found is classified. What a weird coincidence. I'm sure it's just a mistake. And in fact, the wording in the documents reported on by Jesse Waters is actually feels like a juvenile cover-up. It's almost like they want us looking at this. So here's Jesse Waters to help explain.
When the cocaine was first found, they said it was in the library where the first family lives.
We have a yellow bar stating cocaine, hydrochloride, that's found in the library.
Then there were reports that the cocaine was actually found outside the Situation Room.
Now the investigation has progressed, and so they're saying the West Executive entrance, which, as you noted, is closer to the Situation Room.
The Secret Service then said no. It was in a cubby with a lot of foot traffic around it. And yes, there are cameras, but that particular cubby was in a blind spot. How do you mistake the library for the Situation Room and the Situation Room for the cubbies? They told us they didn't find any DNA, but the documents say they did. Remember, the Coke baggies been blown up. The Secret Service took the evidence from Quantico and they destroyed it. They didn't want the FBI to have it, but there's more evidence that they didn't destroy. An envelope with 3 tubes of DNA. Where'd they get the DNA from? They got the DNA off the baggie. So the Secret Service lied, and so did the White House. They did find DNA on the baggie, and the DNA was processed and has been moved to an evidence vault for preservation.
Well, President Trump has the best take on the whole situation. He just straight up said it. When he was asked who the baggie belonged to, he just said, well, it's either Joe or Hunter. It could be Joe. You got a clip of him.
In my opinion, it's Hunter and probably Joe. Because, you watch Joe at the beginning of a speech, and he's got a little life. Not much, but he's got a little life. By the end of the speech, he's a disaster. He can't even find his way off the thing. So there's something going on there, and I wouldn't be surprised if it was for both of them. I think it's for both of them, but that's my opinion.
Man, every time I look at old clips of Joe Biden, I feel like we have to do a dig into the whole CIA mask rabbit hole. But that's another day. About the cocaine, we obviously all know that Hunter had a serious problem with the pow pow. And just a quick reminder that if you want to know about some of old Hunter's various escapades while out nose skiing on the taxpayer's dime, you can see the content of his laptop at bidenlaptopmedia.com, or at least you could. And then I was going back to grab some screenshots for this episode and noticed that it won't load anymore. The site is down and you have to go to archive.org. It turns out that the site went down somewhere in January of this year. Who knows? Maybe just a coincidence. So now, we'll come back to the White House's affinity for hard drugs in just a moment. But I want to take a quick detour for some of my favorite Biden family tinfoil that I don't hear discussed nearly enough. Because Joe Biden is a lifelong career politician that showed some real promise. And by promise, I mean that he wasn't very bright, even before he was senile, and he was the kind of puppet that the deep state could take all the way to the White House, which they did, obviously. But his family has all the hallmarks, is really the textbook case of being blackmailed. And I hate to kick a dead horse, but it looks to me like the Biden family may have had some Israeli handlers swimming in its midst. Keyword here is may. This thread that we're about to weave is mostly just speculation, probably all officially misinformation, but it's fun. And at least for now, fun is still legal on the internet, so sue me. We're going to do it. Because if you remember, Joe Biden had a non-loser, non-drug addicted son, Beau Biden, eldest son from Joe's previous marriage to Naylia Biden, who tragically died just 6 weeks after Biden was elected to the Senate. Now, we're not going to go into the sacrificing a loved one conspiracy theory that Kanye has spoken openly about in the past, or at least not right now. Because Beau Biden overcame this terrible tragedy, losing his mother and baby sister, and went on to show extreme promise. And he was the 44th Attorney General of Delaware when he died suddenly and tragically of glioblastoma. Who knows how far his political career might have gone. And his grieving wife, Hallie Olivier Biden, then did what all grieving wives do and promptly started sleeping with her dead husband's brother, who was also nursing a presumably new and budding crack addiction. And yes, now we have headlines that read, Beau and Hunter Biden's shared ex. Awkward. So let's break this down. Hunter Biden, who was married and had kids, started sleeping with his dead brother's widow when they both have kids, when they've watched each other's kids grow up. Hunter hasn't even finalized his divorce with his own wife yet, and he starts sleeping with his sister-in-law. And yeah, he's grieving and lonely and clearly growing through a rough patch. Plus, once he starts smoking crack, we kind of all know that crackheads will basically do anything for a rush. But Hallie, presumably an upstanding Jewish mother, thinks, oh, look, a crackhead. My crackhead brother-in-law. That's exactly the kind of man that I want to sleep with in order to get over my husband's death. Now, I know it's a stretch, but while we're here, just consider a potential scenario. If Hallie Biden were a handler or an intelligence asset placed into the Biden family to target the eldest and most promising son of the Biden family, this might explain why she would do something so depraved. If you had just had your incredibly fortuitous placement inside the Biden family ruined by some random cancer, that would be an incredibly delicate position to have been able to achieve in the first place. You don't want to just throw out all of that hard work. But hey, you could always get with the crackhead. Maybe that'll keep you involved in the family. Now, obviously, this didn't go over too well. And once the country caught on to the story, it kind of blew up into a huge scandal. No matter how much cover the media tried to run for them. Plus, at the time, Hunter is gallivanting all around the world, banging hookers on camera, smoking crack on camera. There are some truly disturbing photos and videos in these archives. But perhaps most disturbing, what I think is most disturbing, Hunter's entire camera roll is archived. And all throughout it, it's pretty obvious that he has duplicated a number of photos over and over again. You can see when this happens in a camera roll. I do this frequently when I'm making videos, and you'll see the same blocks of identical photos recur in different places all throughout the camera roll. Hunter Biden repeatedly duplicated photos of his child niece in her swimsuit. sometimes with her underage girlfriends in swimsuits too. Now, let's just say that there's only one reason that I can think of why Hunter would be repeatedly duplicating those sorts of photos specifically all throughout his camera roll. There are also a number of very sexual photos that she apparently shared with him. It's all really disgusting, and I'm not going to show any of the images here, obviously. If you want to go further down the Biden family sexual abuse of children rabbit hole, you can look up Ashley Biden's diary, videos of Joe sniffing kids, and look into the laptop for yourself. It's totally gross. But we're getting sidetracked from the sidetrack, so let's get back on course. Hallie, the widow of Beau Biden, is sleeping with crackhead Hunter. And that goes on for 3 years until 2019, when the scandal is just a little too scandalous. And so then, out of the blue, Hunter Biden meets this other lovely younger Jewish woman named Melissa Cohen. Melissa Cohen looks like this. She's a beautiful young blonde filmmaker from South Africa. And she sees this crackhead with no teeth and thinks, that's my guy. That's the dude I've been waiting all my life to sweep me off my feet. In fact, they fall so madly in love that they get married, get matching shalom tattoos, and in less than a week, they get pregnant, more or less immediately. Their son is born about 10 months after they meet. Now, obviously, this is speculation. There is no proof or evidence of these connections that I'm drawing, and it is entirely possible that I am wrong and Melissa Cohen really does just love 50-year-old crackheads who are fresh out of relationships with their sister-in-laws. But here you have a family, like the Kennedy family, that is objectively a prime target for any and every intelligence agency out there. We know for a fact that Hunter was collecting massive amounts of blackmail files on himself at the request of someone. He says as much in some of the videos on the laptop, though he never specifies who exactly is coercing him into filming and photographing all his behavior. It's pretty clear that he's not just doing it all for the funsies. Hunter allegedly had 3 or 4 laptops of blackmail material collected, and he speaks about this in some of those videos, but he just happened to drop this one off and forget about it at some random repair shop, which to me almost sounds like a cry for help or some sort of attempt to get out from under the thumb of his blackmailers, but who really knows? Beyond the laptops, though, we have 2 different Jewish women in the Biden family, both acting in very suspicious ways. First, Hallie, who seems desperate to maintain a position in the family and is willing to sleep with her crackhead brother-in-law to do so. Who knows what role she may have played in his addiction or the blackmail, but then Melissa Cohen picks up right where Hallie left off and locks our boy Hunter down the moment that Hallie has to step out of the picture. I mean, when you look at an aging man like Joe Biden in the 2010s, a man at the end of his career, what do you think would be the most effective way to control a man like that? His last living son? His grandkids? Lord knows what they might have on Hunter beyond what has already come out. Do you think they could have videos of Hunter raping a child when he was blacked out on a cocaine bender? Because based on Hunter's own testimony and what we see on the laptop, that would have been the easiest operation you could have ever pulled. It would have taken 0 skill. You could have literally just found him halfway through a bender and told him you had more drugs and girls back at your place and Bob's your uncle. It's entirely within the realm of possibility, even probability, that someone has the kind of blackmail on Hunter that could lock him away in prison for a long time. We know that Israel has targeted the president of the United States before, like when Jeffrey Epstein visited the Clinton White House 17 times. Now, look at Joe Biden's presidency. Do we see any evidence at all that he was being controlled? Is it remotely possible that perhaps he was taking orders from someone who had powerful blackmail over him or his last living son? Nah, that'd be crazy, dude. That'd be crazy. I'm sure it's all just coincidences. But anyways, I had to go down that side quest because I think it's hilarious and kind of fun. It's also super tragic. But we were talking about the cocaine that was found in the White House, and I thought now would be a great time to remind us all that the White House, or more particularly the deep state, has always had quite a thing for narcotics. But before we do that, let's take a quick break from all the seriousness for a couple words from our sponsors. I want to take a moment to tell you about Take Lean. You're going to think I'm talking about weight loss injections, but I'm not. These remarkable weight loss testimonials came from a doctor-formulated weight loss supplement called Lean. Patty S. said, I finally found a weight loss product that works. I wanted to lose 20 pounds and lean really curves my appetite. Lori M wrote, I've struggled to get weight off and lean has been a lifesaver. I've been losing a couple pounds a week or more. And Kelly F said, amazing. I immediately noticed an energy boost and a healthy weight loss. I would promote this product to anyone. Lean was created by a doctor and university researcher to target the goals of GLP-1s, but without the injections. The studied ingredients in lean have been shown to lower blood sugar, radically reduce appetite, and burn fat by converting it into energy. If you're struggling to lose weight and healthy diet and exercise isn't enough, lean is for you. Get yourself started with 20% off. Just use code Candace20 at takelean.com. That's code Candace20 at takelean.com. Again, takelean.com. Results vary. These statements have not been evaluated by the FDA and is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease and is not a substitute for care from a healthcare provider. Okay, a quick moment to tell you guys about Tax Network USA. Tax day may have passed, but for millions of Americans, the real trouble is just beginning. If you missed the April 15th deadline or still owe back taxes, the IRS is ramping up enforcement. Every day you wait only makes things worse. With over 5,000 new tax liens filed daily and tools like property seizures, bank levies, and wage garnishments, the IRS is applying pressure at levels we haven't seen in years. Increased administrative scrutiny means collections are moving fast. The good news? There's still time for Tax Network USA to help. Self-employed or a business owner? Even if your books are a mess, they've got it covered. Tax Network USA specializes in cleaning up financial chaos and getting you back on track fast. Even after the deadline, it's not too late to regain control. Your consultation is completely free, and acting now could stop penalties, threatening letters, and surprise levies before they escalate. Call 1-800-958-1000 or visit tnusa.com/Candace. You may have missed April 15th, but you haven't run out of options. Let Tax Network USA help before the IRS makes the next move. Call 1-800-958-1000 or visit tnusa.com/Candace. So as I was saying, the American government and governments all around the world have a long history of being involved in the drug trafficking industries. And there's many examples, too many to go over all of them, but we're going to speed run some of the spiciest, starting with these. These are documents detailing how George H.W. Bush worked with Richard Helms, then the director of the CIA, and others to smuggle heroin in the Golden Triangle during the Vietnam War. They allege that not only were they running the world's largest heroin smuggling operation abroad at the time, but that they were making a lot more of their money by selling the smack directly to American soldiers fighting in Vietnam. There's a whole crazy rabbit hole around this document and another trove of records about CIA black budget bank accounts and drug smuggling and the castration of a Central American dictator. But we'll do that full dig another day. Because then there's the time when the CIA took over the smuggling operations of Latin American cartels and started flying cargo planes of cocaine into Mena, Arkansas. Gary Webb famously uncovered and reported on how this CIA operation was single-handedly responsible for starting and fueling the entire crack cocaine epidemic in American black communities in the 80s and 90s. Webb famously committed suicide by shooting himself in the head twice. And when people said that sounded kind of suspicious, the CIA was sure to investigate themselves and found that they had had nothing to do with either his death or any drug trafficking. So, case closed. Then, more recently, you have Afghanistan. And I want to dig into Afghanistan in a little more depth because it's recent, it's instructive, and I think it might make a shift in the nature of global drug trafficking right now. But first, let's start way back in the 1800s with the British Empire, because this is some history I don't think enough people know about. So as the British Empire expanded around the globe, mostly on the back of the world's first true international megacorporation, the East India Trading Company, opium grew to be one of its largest revenue generators. They turned India into a giant poppy farm, and most of the opium grown in India was shipped to China, which was conveniently just downwind from India. India detested it, China was destroyed by it, and Great Britain raked in immeasurable wealth from it. In 1880, the UK Parliament debated the history of their opium trade, and contained in that examination are some wild details. According to the UK Parliament, the percentage of Indian revenue from opium ballooned up to nearly 17% from a single crop. That's insane. I can't find any clear figures as to how much revenue the British Empire was bringing in from this trade, but it's safe to say that it was a lot. Like, their quality of life significantly depended on opium trafficking. China, for obvious reasons, was not too stoked that all their people, especially their men, were getting addicted to opium, and their civilization was buckling under the weight of that addiction. So they outlawed the use and trade of opium and seized a bunch of opium, mostly owned by British traders. Britain, however, was not about it, and they went to war with China over it and eventually won. When they did, they forced China to legalize opium once again and to continue to accept British opium imports. Then, in 1856, the Chinese government seized a pirate smuggling ship laden with opium named the Arrow. If you read the Wikipedia, it claims that this was an official British merchant ship, but in the records from Parliament recorded in 1880, you read this, quote, "The Second War arose out of the smuggling of opium. The Chinese seized the Lorcha Arrow, a vessel of the pirate class that was engaged in smuggling. It was distinctly proved that she was not under the protection of the British flag at the time she was seized. But we, nevertheless, went to war with China and destroyed her ships, her people, and her buildings, as usual." So, nevertheless, Britain again was not having it and went to war with China. This time, the French got involved, as did the other European empires and the new American colonies, because they'd all gotten in on the opium trade by now as well. China was once again defeated, and the opium trade continued. At the time, Hong Kong was a British colony, and it was developed largely on the profits of this opium trade. The well-known modern bank, HSBC, was founded specifically to manage the obscene profits generated by the opium trade, and to this day, they are still mired in money laundering and drug scandals. If you're not familiar, opium is derived from the opium poppy plant, and it's one of the oldest forms of refined opioid drugs. In the late 1800s, scientists discovered a new way to refine opium, and heroin was invented. In 1898, Bayer, the guys who make aspirin and now own Monsanto, Bayer began pumping out heroin like hotcakes, like super good hotcakes, like so good they'll put you to sleep hotcakes. Clinicians at the time reported that it was the perfect remedy for just about everything from tuberculosis to asthma, even bronchitis. You got a cough? Try heroin. What could go wrong? Physicians at the time even claimed that heroin was a great way to get over morphine addiction. Just wait until they figure out fentanyl. I mean, seriously. Oh no, we're addicted to opioids. What should we do? Have you tried heroin? So obviously, they were retarded. Heroin is extremely addictive, quite capable of being lethal, and has ever since been one of the most destructive and profitable illegal drugs ever invented. So, naturally, it was the perfect cash crop for the CIA to use to fund its growing list of black budget programs in the 60s and 70s. So, in this FBI report, written in 1989, it details how George H.W. Bush earned the nickname Poppy, not referring to dad, but to something else. Just a few quick excerpts from this report. We can do a whole nother episode on this sometime. This is about the people that were in charge of the operation. 4 of the 5 were handpicked for their very special abilities and expertise. The 5th member of the group, Armitage, was brought along by George Bush as his personal gopher. Bush was chosen for his knowledge of China and his wartime flying ability, as well as being on the way up within the CIA, although this is before he was ever officially involved in the CIA, so lies. And then I'm just going to skip down all the way to the bottom. The 5 names were submitted to the godfather of the CIA, John Foster Dulles, who gave the plan his total blessing. It goes on to say, the master plan called for the CIA to enter into the drug smuggling business in a total and complete fashion. Each of the 5 planners would have his own field to handle. Bush would be the secret head of ONA and handle all the shipping of the drugs under forged waybills. Armitage would be the gopher for the group and the intermediary with any undesirables. General Lansdale would handle all the distribution networks and collection services within the military in Vietnam. William Colby was to handle the setting up of all the manpower, from runners, peddlers, pushers, collectors, and so forth, as well as the elimination of any who might prove to be uncontrollable, be they American or Vietnamese. Lieutenant Colonel Ferreira was to use his contacts in Latin America and in the Middle East to obtain from various governments that needed drugs, heroin, cocaine, marijuana, LSD, etc., as ordered by Colby. Bush was to handle the opium from China. It also has this crazy section near the end about the time when this one spy, General Ferreira that we just heard about, snuck into Manuel Noriega's mansion in Panama, ambushed him, tied him up, cut off his testicles, and shoved them in his mouth to prove a point. It's a crazy story. We could do a whole episode, and maybe someday we will. But this report specifically details how this top secret program run by Bush and Helms smuggled heroin to U.S. servicemen in Vietnam and then funneled the cash into secret CIA bank accounts that would be used to fund top secret black budget programs all around the world. A junior member of this plot, William Casey, would later go on to be the architect of the cocaine smuggling operations exposed in the Iran-Contra scandal during the 1980s. Same story. The CIA was smuggling cocaine into America and using the profits to fund an illegal proxy war which Congress had explicitly told them not to finance. Interesting that they happened to use a quiet little airport in the state where Bill Clinton was governor at the time. Bill Clinton's brother was nursing a 4 gram of cocaine a day habit around this time. He was later charged with cocaine possession and trafficking, but Bill made sure to pardon him in 2001, just before he left office. And then, speaking of 2001, in 2001, a ragtag group of 19 Arab terrorists with absolutely zero CIA or Mossad protection decided to nearly fail basic Cessna flight school and then hijack a bunch of passenger planes and then fly them into the Twin Towers and also the secret room in the Pentagon responsible for Rumsfeld's little budget error of more than $2 trillion. But don't worry, Rumsfeld wasn't even there at the time, though he did pass a memo that day asking his people to determine whether the attack was good enough to hit Saddam Hussein, despite the fact that Iraq had nothing to do with any of it. And in all the madness, Building 7 decided it was tired and controlled demolition itself. And although jet fuel apparently melts steel beams and pulverizes an entire tower's worth of concrete into a fine dust, it does not, in fact, have much of an effect on passports, which flutter down to the sidewalks of New York unscathed so they would be conveniently found within hours of the attack. Authorities hardly needed them, though, because Mohammed Atta, leader of the hijackers, had thought it prudent to leave a briefcase full of his plans with names and photos of all the hijackers in the airport where he took off. Just for posterity's sake, obviously. So, within a few days, we were zeroed in on al-Qaeda and therefore Afghanistan, who was allegedly harboring the most evil man in the world, Osama bin Laden. Osama bin Laden wrote a letter later to the American people that recently went viral all over TikTok because Gen Z suddenly realized that he was making more sense than our own politicians. As soon as it went viral, it was pulled down from The Guardian, where it had been hosted for years, and then an internet-wide censorship campaign was launched. In it were passages like this: the course of the policies of the present administration in several areas clearly reveals that whoever enters the White House, even with good intentions to safeguard the people's interest, is no more than a train operator. His only task is to keep the train on the tracks that are laid down by the lobbyists in New York and Washington to serve their interests first, even if it is counter to your security and economy. Any president who tries to move the train from the lobbyist tracks or to track for the American people's interest will confront very strong opposition and pressure from the lobbyists. Your president described the decision by the court in favor of corporations to intervene in the political arena as a victory, but it is not a victory for the American people except for the big corporations. There is no doubt about it that it is a right, and it is also a right for the administration to support the oppressive Israelis for the continued occupation of our land and the killing of our brothers, marking a victory for the Jewish lobby. The president was not able to defend you against the security and economic loss. The way for change and freeing yourselves from the pressure of lobbyists is not through the Republican or the Democratic parties, but through the undertaking of you get the point. And although bro makes some pretty good points, let me just be clear that I do not condone or endorse terrorism or Osama bin Laden. He did some pretty evil shit in his time, and maybe not as much as Donald Rumsfeld or Dick Cheney, but anyways, Afghanistan was a big problem in 2001, like really big. Even before Building 7 decided it wanted in on Larry Silverstein's particularly extensive insurance policy, Afghanistan was a problem. Because for quite some time, it had produced the lion's share of the world's opium and heroin supply. At least, it did until the Taliban moved in and took over in 2000 and outlawed the production of the drug. Global drug markets cratered. Then, conveniently, the very next year, the country was overrun by U.S. Marines that promptly were ordered to help rebuild the country by guarding newly planted opium fields. By 2002, opium production was back, and in 2004, it was reaching new heights. Heroin and opium production continued to rise from there until it peaked at record highs in 2017 before leveling off. Then, In 2022, Joe Biden ordered a sudden and chaotic withdrawal, an absolute national embarrassment and a crime against both the Afghan and American people who had fought for 2 decades in a meaningless and pointless conflict that cost thousands of Americans and millions of Afghani lives. And then, conveniently, U.S. troops were ordered to leave all their military equipment there for the Taliban to seize, almost like the U.S. government was intentionally arming terrorists. Now, where have I read about that before? The very next year, after the Taliban took control of Afghanistan, opium production cratered back down to record lows and has remained there ever since. It's almost like the U.S. government has given up on its long-standing tradition of overseeing global heroin trafficking. But let's rewind and talk about the opioid epidemic for a moment, because in it, I think we will find the likely reason for this apparent change of course. The opioid epidemic, often considered to have begun in the early 2000s, one might even suggest in 2001, has cost more than 500,000 American lives and well over $1 trillion. It was driven first into middle America by the overprescription of new opioid medications like Oxycontin, which were marketed to doctors as a new and non-addictive pain medication. It was prescribed to kids on the football team who got injured, to moms and dads after surgery, or for just about anything else doctors could dream up, because it was later reported that doctors were receiving kickbacks for prescribing it. Well, not technically kickbacks, but it just turned out that on average, across wide studies, doctors who prescribed more opioids just happened to be getting paid more money by Big Pharma. Just pure coincidence, I'm sure. Purdue Pharma, owned by the Sackler family, also gave real kickbacks, meaning straight up bribes, to the company that makes one of the most widely used doctor prescribing portals, so that when doctors would use their computer in the doctor's office to prescribe you drugs, it would give pop-ups encouraging them to prescribe Purdue Pharma's opioids. These and other practices led to an absolutely insane amount of opioids flowing out into everyday American households over the last 20 years. In 2016, there were 323 million people living in America, and doctors wrote 215 million prescriptions for opioids. That is one prescription for 2 out of every 3 men, women, and children and babies in the United States. Because prescriptions are often written to the same person multiple times a year, that turned out to be nearly 20% of the population receiving opioid prescriptions that year. In the median U.S. county, physicians prescribed an amount of opioids in 2015 equivalent to a nearly 2-week supply of oxycodone for every resident, man, woman, and child. And for far too many of these Americans, that first prescription turned into an addiction. And when eventually prescription opioids are too hard to come by or too expensive, they turn to heroin and other street drugs. This devastated my generation. Nearly every single person from my generation lost friends in high school and college to this tragedy. Regular kids, the star of the football team, the class clown, honor students, who all of a sudden dropped off the map, disappeared to out-of-state rehab, or died of overdoses. The tragedy of the opioid epidemic is hard to overstate and was made all the more tragic because it was being prescribed by doctors to otherwise successful and average people, not to drug addicts, not to dropouts, not as a last step down a long descent into degeneracy. The doctor's office itself became the gateway to the destruction of families and of lives. And during this time, Afghanistan was by far and away the leading global supplier of the opium used to make these drugs. We waged a war for 20 years to subsidize and protect these profits. American soldiers guarded these poppy fields while the opium derived from them was shipped home to addict and kill their own friends and family members. But then, something changed. Around 2015, fentanyl started to flood the market and began turning up in samples of other street drugs like ecstasy and cocaine. You can see here the purple line is other synthetic opioids. Skyrockets. And meanwhile, the orange line, heroin, levels off and starts to decline slightly. Fentanyl is a synthetic opioid that is made in a laboratory without the need to fight a war to secure millions of hectares of poppy production. It's also up to 100 times more potent than heroin and 10,000 times more potent than morphine. These images depict a lethal dose of fentanyl, which can be as small as a few grains of sand. You can see the size of a lethal dose of heroin compared to a lethal dose of fentanyl. So now this stuff is being mixed into other street drugs to make them feel more potent And kids are dying from overdoses when they think they're taking something else that is, at least in the grand scheme of things, relatively harmless. How strange, though, that we are no longer interested in Afghanistan and their poppy fields right as the heroin market is cracked open by this new synthetic opioid that makes poppy cultivation essentially obsolete. Must just be a coincidence, huh? Sort of like that one time back in 2019 when a cargo ship owned by JP Morgan Chase was seized with 20 tons of cocaine on board. The estimated street value of this shipment was over $1 billion. It was the largest vessel ever seized in Border Patrol history. And so, you might say, our federal government sure is taking this drug trafficking thing seriously. But you read more closely and you learn how the world really works. JP Morgan leased the boat to Mediterranean Shipping Co., absolving JP Morgan of any liability for the boat's crew and cargo. Mediterranean Shipping Co. said, quote, unfortunately, shipping and logistics companies are from time to time affected by trafficking problems. Correct. It is a big problem when you get caught transporting more than $1 billion of cocaine, but not so big of a problem that the corporation is going to be investigated at all. No. Instead, a few of the crew members were charged with cocaine trafficking charges, but obviously the shipping company could never have known that this was happening, so why even investigate them? JP Morgan obviously had nothing to do with it either. But then, you remember that one time when Jeffrey Epstein was referring billionaire and other influential clients to JP Morgan Chase for banking services, and it turned into a whole scandal? I mean, why did the Obama White House counsel even know him, let alone talk to him? Because, when you read a little deeper, you'll learn that she was referred to JP Morgan by Epstein in February of 2019, just 4 months before his arrest on federal child sex trafficking charges. 4 months! This referral came 6 years after JP Morgan claims that it cut all ties with Epstein because of repeated red flags on his account. All the big banks are dirty as heck. There are reports every year of banks being caught laundering money for the cartels and traffickers. But there are never reports of criminal investigations or any accountability. They just pay a few small fines here and there and keep doing business as normal because these people are not like you and me. They are the ownership class, the political class, and the banking class. We are raised to believe that we live in a just world, that our government are the good guys, and that those terrorists and drug cartels and criminals out there are the bad guys. But that couldn't be further from the truth. Why do you think you've heard of Colombian drug kingpins going to prison for cocaine trafficking, but no one ever even suggested doing the same to the director of the CIA when he was overseeing smuggling operations? Why do you think Obama's counsel was apparently pals with Jeffrey Epstein, but no one thought to look deeper into that connection? For the same reason why JP Morgan and Mediterranean Shipping Co. were not even investigated over the cocaine bust on their boat, because they run the show. These people are the deep state. And when corruption has seeped this far into the American government, they're playing on friendly turf. The corporate, government, and intelligence agency playbook is designed in this exact way to create plausible deniability. When Barry Seal was bringing an entire military cargo plane of cocaine in and out of Mena, Arkansas every few weeks, no one's ever going to wind up looking at Bill Clinton to see whether or not it's possible that Barry was getting away with it because he had protection from and was working with corrupt people in our own government. No one's going to be able to prove that anyone at JP Morgan had any knowledge that their boats were being used to smuggle billions of dollars of cocaine. The executives at Universal Music had no way to know that their boy Diddy was allegedly running a trafficking and blackmail operation. Just might as well take their names off the lawsuits and not even look into them, despite the fact that they were allegedly funding and attending the parties. If the CIA wanted to shut down the global heroin supply at any time during the last 2 decades, they could have easily done so. After all, the entire global industry was reliant on American soldiers standing guard over the very poppy fields that supplied the traffickers and cartels. They know where the cocaine is coming from. They've been working with those guys for decades. They know who the human traffickers are. They're laundering their money for them. The DEA and Customs and Border Patrol don't exist to stop drugs or weapons or human trafficking, though that's what the agents who sign up for the job usually think. But the institutions at the highest level, they serve to protect the turf of this American deep state. If you don't have the protection of insiders, they'll catch you and throw you in prison. But if you run your drugs on JP Morgan boats in and out of friendly ports to and from deep state assets, well, how many boats like this one do you think brought their shipments in undetected, before some uppity agents happened to step out of line and catch this boat. My bet is that it was a lot of them. Because whether it's cocaine or heroin or children, it's all the Truman Show. They let us go on believing that these things are illegal and carry a harsh prison sentence, but usually they're just illegal for anyone else to cut into their profits and their lifestyle. Because as long as people in our government are doing drugs and raping kids on private islands, you dang well better believe they're protecting their supply. And you don't get much closer to the symbolic top of the pyramid than cocaine in the White House. And it's cute that Kash and Dan think they're going to investigate and prosecute someone over this. In fact, it's kind of offensive. Because while these guys are chasing around a little baggie of coke that we all know could have been anyone and everyone in the Biden White House, the Epstein files are still just sitting on Pam Bondi's desk, collecting dust. Because everyone implicated in them is part of the untouchable ruling class. They are the bankers, the politicians, the celebrities, and the corporate executives that make the world go round. And the whole world works for them. And now, we've got a blackmail sex tape scandal to discuss. But first, I want to take a break to mention one of our sponsors. And now, let me tell you about Home Title Lock. If you're a homeowner, you need to listen to this. When's the last time you checked on your home title? That's the legal proof that you own your own house. If you're like me, the answer is never. The problem is, in today's AI and cyber world, scammers are stealing home titles, and your equity is the target. Here's how it works. Criminals forge your signature on one document, use a fake notary stamp, pay a small fee with your county, and boom, your home title has been transferred out of your name. Then they take out loans using your equity or even sell your property. You won't even know it's happening until you get a collection or foreclosure notice. That's why you need to stop what you're doing and find out today if you're already a victim. Use promo code Candace at HometitleLock.com/Candace to make sure your title is still in your name. You'll also get a free title history report plus a free 14-day trial of their $1 million triple lock protection. That's 24/7 monitoring of your title, urgent alerts to any changes, and if fraud should happen, they'll spend up to $1 million to fix it. Go to HometitleLock.com/Candace now. Use promo code Candace. That's HometitleLock.com/Candace with promo code Candace. So, last week, X was momentarily flooded with a sex tape scandal surrounding legendary independent journalist Glenn Greenwald. If you're not familiar with Glenn, he's been in the game since about 2003, when a lot of us were still learning to write in complete sentences. He's contributed to some of the top anti-corruption stories of all time, including being one of the primary journalists to receive and publish leaked documents from Edward Snowden. He won a Pulitzer Prize for his work on the Snowden story. He went on to be one of the founding members of The Intercept, where he was a key player in receiving and reporting the first leaks of Hillary Clinton's email server that eventually exposed a whole archive of criminal activity in Libya, Haiti, as well as the infamous Pizzagate emails that were eventually published on WikiLeaks. He reported on a major corruption scandal in Brazil, exposing members of the Bolsonaro government, including judges and prosecutors, of corruption in attempts to rig elections. He criticized Bush, he criticized Obama, and he criticized Trump. Then, in 2020, when editors at The Intercept tried to censor his reporting on Joe Biden's corrupt dealings with China and Ukraine, rather than acquiesce to censorship, he left the publication that he had helped to found. Instead, he went independent and quickly amassed one of the largest audiences of anyone in the space. All throughout his career, despite being Jewish, he has criticized the government of Israel over the military policies and intelligence operations. He has been deeply critical of their treatment of Palestinians since long before October 7th. And then, last week, he scheduled to sit down with Tucker Carlson for a podcast. And the day before the episode aired, a private sexual video of him was leaked online. I'm sure that the timing was just a coincidence. I'm sure it was just some random disgruntled kids that hacked his phone or computer and leaked it all on Twitter. Probably not a foreign government or intelligence agency trying to embarrass and silence him. Now, I didn't watch the videos out of respect to Glenn. Glenn is a grown man, and based on the conversation online, I could tell that there was no kids involved. Glenn's gay, and we've known this for a long time, and so the videos were just meant to embarrass and presumably to just occupy the conversation around him. Glenn put out a statement that was exceptionally well worded that I just want to read. Quote, "Last night, videos were released online depicting behavior in my private life. Some were distorted and others were not. They were published without my knowledge or consent, and its publication was therefore criminal. Though we do not yet know exactly who is responsible, we are close to knowing, and the motive was a maliciously political one. As for the content of the videos, I have no embarrassment or regret about them. The videos depict consenting adults engaging in intimate actions in their private lives. They all display fully consensual behavior harming nobody. Obviously, it can be uncomfortable and unpleasant when your private behavior is made public against your will. That's why the behavior is in private in the first place. But the only wrongdoing here is the criminal and malicious publication of the videos in an attempt to malign perceived political enemies and advance a political agenda. Others are, of course, free to form their own judgments, as some are prone to do about others' private lives. It won't change my work. I will continue all the many prongs of my journalism and pursue the causes most important to me, exactly as before. And basically, the entire internet shared the same sentiment. We don't care. Glenn Greenwald is one of the most impactful independent journalists of our generation. What he does in his own bedroom with consenting adults is his own business. Some of the comments underneath Glenn's posts were both hilarious and awesome to read. Cernovich, a slightly more serious take here. Glad that I've been out of the loop and missed this. Sorry you've been targeted in this way. Showing moral courage is important because blackmail only works when people live in fear, which is what the powerful want and demand via other coercive ways. The Hodge twins just said, "You wild as hell, Glenn." And even Andrew Tate weighed in, saying, "F him, keep up the good fight." Andrew Tate is normally the first guy to call someone a faggot. And here he is, supporting Glenn Greenwald, because we all get it. Journalism needs to stand up to stuff like this, because once they're doing things like this to journalists, where does it end? That post has been viewed over 22 million times. And ironically for the leakers, the story has been a huge backfire. Not only did the world not care, but it also exposed a dark and important truth about today's media landscape. The world is run by blackmail, and it's not just politicians that will be targeted. They, whoever they are, will do just about anything to just about anyone who threatens them to try to silence the truth, uphold their narrative, and maintain power. I've been wondering for some time now if we would start seeing blackmail of independent media, and now, thanks to Glenn Greenwald falling on this grenade for all of us, we have proof. The question we should all be asking is how many other people in independent media might be controlled by blackmail that has not been released? How many people out there would not have the spine of Glenn and rather than suffer embarrassment, would change their reporting, do their blackmailers' bidding, or compromise their values? And to be clear, so far, we don't know who it was that hacked and released these videos. We don't know who might want to embarrass or silence Glenn Greenwald. At least, we don't know for sure. But personally, I have my own suspicions. And if you want evidence to help you decide who you think is trying to blackmail journalists, you should go watch Glenn's interview with Tucker and think for yourself. For now, we'll just show a brief clip from the interview that I picked out. Totally at random, obviously.
In 2022 and 2023, there were a bunch of MAGA people who were opposed to the funding of the war in Ukraine. And some non-MAGA people too, like RFK Jr. And I was obviously very opposed to it from the start. You were too. I went on the show many times to talk about that. And I had a bunch of them on, like Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene and RFK Jr., a lot of them. And I always had this same plan. I would ask them, like, why are you opposed to having the U.S. fund the war in Ukraine? Like, don't you want the U.S. to stand up for Ukraine against Russia? And they would all say, this isn't our business. This is on the other side of the world. It doesn't affect my constituents. Our communities are falling apart. We have fentanyl addiction sweeping our communities. Nobody has jobs. Nobody has healthcare. Our country is falling apart. We don't have the money to keep sending to foreign countries. And it's outrageous that we keep doing it. And they would be very passionate and very adamant. I would encourage them to keep developing that idea. And they would say all those things with which I completely agreed. And then my next question was always, do you apply the same rationale to the United States funding the Israeli military and Israeli society and Israeli wars? And they would all stutter to try and distinguish why it was that they had one view for Ukraine and a very compelling rationale, but then had to say, oh no, Israel is different. There's this attempt now to impose on colleges, require colleges to adopt, but also enact into American law, this radical expansion of what anti-Semitism means. Like there's laws that say, here's what racism is, here's what, xenophobia is, here's what Islamophobia is, misogyny, whatever, to expand the definition of anti-Semitism to include statements not only about Jewish people who should be subjected to critique. Like you should be able to say, that Ben Shapiro seems to care quite a lot about Israel, maybe even to the point that he cares about it more than the United States. Like you should be able to express that critique. But the other thing is you cannot say, this is just one example, you cannot say Israel is a racist endeavor. You can say Iran is a racist endeavor. You can say Hamas is a racist endeavor. You can say the United States is a racist endeavor. You can say anything you can be a student at a school a month away from completing your PhD with a completely clean record, and you can write an op-ed saying, I think America is a country of violence and imperialism and evil and was founded on racism, and you'll be totally fine. You write an op-ed, 1/10 of those criticisms, but about Israel, and ICE is coming to get you and to deport you.
So don't pay any attention, obviously, to any of those points that he's making. Don't argue those arguments at all. Don't address the facts or the material of the concerns. Instead, you should pay attention to the scandal. Pay attention to the sex tape. Pay attention to the distractions, because we're still waiting for any informed or rational way of addressing those concerns from the experts, from someone who's been there. We're waiting to hear. So that's our show for today. Really appreciate you tuning in. It would be a real big help if you liked the video, shared it with your friends, subscribe to Candace's channel. Also really appreciate it on my end if you follow the link in the description to go to my channel on YouTube, Ian Carroll's Show, and subscribe over there, because when I'm done taking over for Candace, I'm going to take all this stuff we do and move it right over there and keep on rolling. We'll be bringing you more updates on Candace, baby Roman, all that, as well as digging into all sorts of other scandals and stories that the big boys don't want us to talk about later this week. So have a great night. Take good care of yourself and your family, and we'll see you tomorrow.